lobby, but then by the time you get out here, they just never stop. Which is a good thing. Please be aware that there will be a respectable concussion when the piece is fired. So if you have young children with you, if you have any pets, a hearing aid or sensitive hearing, just please be mindful of that for your own hearing protection. By the way, before we get started, since everybody is out here today, the group that is firing the Royal Artillery are British. Notice that they are in blue coats.
Okay, these are the British soldiers.
Historically accurate dress of that unit. A British unit with blue coats and red facing. The Royal Artillery.
Right. You ready?
A little later on, we will go over the specific, describe it in just a few minutes.
Ram home. Pick and fry. Ready. Fire.
That was fired here today is a reproduction British light 6-pounder, a field gun. The British light 6-pounder was considered to be the battalion gun of the British infantry during this period. The battalion gun meaning that it was designated to move into the field of battle with a battalion of infantry, to give infantry direct support on the field of battle, because it was mobile enough, it was light enough to be able to do that. And for this period, it was a fairly state-of-the-art piece of equipment. That weapon could be very, very effective at 800 to 1,000 yards. Firing solid shot, it could be effective against columns of enemy infantry marching onto the field of battle. It could be also effective against other enemy artillery, as well as horses and caissons or limbers of ammunition as well. Here at Yorktown, General Cornwallis surrendered 244 pieces of artillery. 4/5 of that artillery, so about 200 or so guns, were 12-pounders, just like we saw in the lobby, or even smaller weapons. 9-pounders, 6-pounders, just like this one, 3-pounders, and 4-pounders. And although those weapons were extremely effective within certain situations, they were heavily outgunned here at Yorktown by the French and American artillery. The French and the Americans had about twice the number of artillery as did the British. They had about half the number. The British had twice the number of pieces. The French and the Americans had about 120 to 130 weapons. But the French and American artillery was much bigger caliber, much larger weapons. The French and the Americans had siege guns. If you'll notice to your left, the piece on the big blue carriage, that is a reproduction 24-pounder siege gun. So just by virtue of that title, you already know that the solid shot that that weapon fired weighed 4 times as much as the solid shot that that weapon fired. And in a situation like a siege, the French and the Americans were able to achieve a superiority in artillery fire because of that fact. Most often, a siege involves a duel between the opposing forces of artillery. So whoever can achieve an advantage or superiority in artillery fire oftentimes is the victor. Here at Yorktown, the British had no guns that were that large or any larger on this side of the river. And across the way at Tyndall's Point, they had one single 24-pounder. Please notice, if you will, the earthen mounds that surround us. Those are part of what remain of the British inner defensive line, the fortifications that surrounded the main British defensive position. So the ground that we're standing on right now was occupied by Lieutenant General Cornwallis and his army as their main defensive position. Those earthen walls began just beside us on the river and continued for over 2,000 yards, for over a mile. They ended just the opposite side of Yorktown, which is about a quarter mile from us, again overlooking the river. In this area, those earthen walls were about 12.5 feet tall and about 19 feet thick at the top. So if you were a British officer or soldier on this ground during the siege of 1781, those earthen walls were intended as your protection against anything that an enemy could throw at you. They were intended to absorb enemy fire. That is one of the main reasons why the siege artillery was so much more effective here than the field artillery. The large 24-pound solid shot from that weapon could literally decimate those earthen walls, pound away at them until physical gaps were created in those earthen fortifications. All the while, the French and the Americans were moving close enough to the exterior of these works that they could assault and take this position if the British didn't surrender outright. That 24-pounder siege gun had a velocity of 866 feet per second. Wow. The 6-pounder field gun threw its solid shot with a velocity of 691 feet per second. That means that when that gun fired, it had a much greater force on impact. Whereas the 6-pounder could be very effective in the open field, it was heavily outgunned by the 24-pounder siege gun. That is what made the difference here at Yorktown. To give you an eyewitness account of the strength of Allied fire here, I offer you a quote by British Lieutenant Bartholomew James. He was in the hornwork only about 300 yards southwest of us that way. This is from October the 12th. Lieutenant James said, "In 52 minutes after my arrival in the hornwork, the enemy silenced the 3 left guns by closing the embrasures. Shortly after which, they dismounted a 12-pounder and knocked off the muzzles of 218. And for the last hour and a half left me with one 18-pounder, with a part of its muzzle also shot away. With this, I kept up a fire until it was also rendered useless." The strength and overwhelming power of Allied artillery played a determining role in the outcome of this engagement. The bombardment began on the part of the Allies the afternoon of October the 9th. It ended the morning of October the 17th. And in that period of just under 8 days, Brigadier General Henry Knox, who commanded Washington's Continental Artillery, estimated that the French and the Americans threw over 15,000 artillery rounds into this position, an average of 1 shot every 1.2 minutes. Is it any wonder that after 8 days of that bombardment that lasted virtually day and night, is it any wonder that General Cornwallis requested surrender terms here? What we're going to do now is our living history detachment will go through the procedures of loading that artillery piece. We're not going to actually fire it this time. We're just going to describe all the procedures that are taking place, and then they will go through it again a second time, after which they will fire for the final time.
Search the gun.
On the command, search the gun, the left front gunner will enter the worm into the bore, the interior of the gun, and remove any debris from a previous shot.
Handle your sponge.
The right front gunner will now enter his, prepare to enter his sponge into the bore. He will moisten it first.
Fire the vent.
The right rear gunner will place his thumb, which is covered by a leather sleeve, on top of the vent at the breech, the back end of the piece. The vent is a hole that leads into the bore, the interior of the gun. If that gun has already been fired, it will be hot, and there's the potential that there could be smoldering debris inside the bore. And what happens if oxygen gets sucked through that vent, that hole, and gets fanned over that smoldering debris? It could cause a premature explosion, which could cause injury to your own gunners. To prevent that, oxygen from getting in the bore, he holds his thumb over the vent.
Sponge the gun.
Now the right front gunner will enter that moistened sponge into the bore to extinguish any smoldering debris and to cool the gun.
1 round dry fire. Advance cartridge.
Our officer gives the command for the type of round to be fired, and our gunner at the limber chest then forwards that round to the gunner at the left front of the piece,
Load with cartridge.
who will place that round just in the very muzzle end of the gun, and then he steps outside the wheel.
Ram home.
The right front gunner sends that round to the breech of the piece so that the black powder end of the round is now immediately under the vent.
Pick and prime.
The right rear gunner is equipped with a priming wire, a copper wire that is sharpened at one end. He drives that through the vent to pierce that bag of black powder to expose the black powder. He is also equipped with a quill primer, a primer that is filled, a tube that is filled with black powder. He places that in the vent to receive the flame.
Take aim.
Our captain is the one that physically sights and aims the weapon, giving the commands by tapping on the trail for slight movement to the right and left.
Ready.
The left rear gunner is equipped with a lens stock that has a hemp rope at the top that smolders, retains a slow burn about the rate of the match. So when the command fire is given and he waves that over the breech of the piece, it ignites the black powder in the quill primer in the vent, which sends the flame to the main charge, and that's what fires the gun.
Fire. Boom.
Pretty,
1 round blank cartridge. Advance cartridge.
And of course, all of these procedures were intended for a couple basic purposes, but 2 of those basic purposes were not only for a high rate of fire to throw as much towards the enemy as you could, but they were also very conscious of safety during that period as well, because dealing with explosive black powder can be very dangerous, and you did not want to cause casualties to your own force. During a battle situation, the gun captain would normally have only called out the type of round and how many rounds to be fired consecutively. The gun detachment would have been so well trained that they would have worked off of each other's movements. Not required.
This is the Yorktown Victory Center and Museum.
Go down, go down. Be careful.
So sugars we know candy, we don't pull on that. I'll show you. This is a toy. You won't find these in camp, but the kids still like it. See if I can get this over here. Sometimes I can catch them on the board. Is that pretty neat? The boys used to play with Tom. There's all sorts of different types. Anyway, so poor nutrition is a big problem with washing faces. And then he has the sugar, a lot of sugar going in the diet, and men have bad teeth. You know what those are? Really? My toothbrushes. Because I want to go into town after the event today and kiss a pretty girl. I don't want to offend her with my bad breath. So I'll chew on this sassafras branch, and I fray the end, and then I'll kind of chew on it, and you get a sweet taste in your mouth. And a lot of people, even though there's a lot of sugar in the diet, still are not taking good care of their teeth. Toothbrushes are very expensive. They don't work very well. Tooth powders are very harsh. And most people don't do it anyway, so tooth extractions are very common in the Army. But people try to keep their teeth clean. They'll wipe them off with cloths and salt, but that's very harsh. It doesn't work very well. But there's my toothbrushes, because I know I have to do something to keep my teeth looking halfway decent and don't want to offend anybody with bad breath.
Goats.
Okay.
So you might want to take a close look at that. Everything else is pretty much the important people. So your office, short. They just are coming from a background where they weren't used to much, and so this is not a big deal.
You have to get 6 people in there.
What they're doing when they construct the earthworks is they're using these in rows and tiers, and that builds up an artificial mountain range. There were portions of the British line that were described as much as 20 wide, 20 high. So when you talk about soldiers digging the trenches, the purpose of trenching was to provide the dirt to fill in these gabions. You put enough of them together, it's like rebar inside concrete. Eventually you've got the structure strong enough to stop cannon. Past the hour. The problem is the movie doesn't get out quite on the hour. That's why we say 3 o'clock. Get a couple buckles. Oh yeah? Yeah. Okay.
Picking up pine needles? Give you an idea of what the farmstead looked like. Looks like they're getting ready to do some planting. We are at the battlefield.
Guess what? I just drove from Jamestown to Yorktown. I drove from Jamestown to Yorktown.
And we have all these mounds because what they did was they dug a whole bunch of enforcements for them to be able to then take the cannons and have the cannons go way over. You can see how they dug to make their protections. You can see how they took their cannons and got them ready to go over the redoubts. This is one of the readouts. This is where they worked out the Articles of Surrender at the Moore House. Okay, well today we are checking out historic Jamestown. Starting off at their visitor center. Okay, well we're going to start seeing everything there is to see in historic Jamestown. We know a lot of this is recreated because there wasn't much of Jamestown left.
imagine I was on one of those 3 ships coming into Jamestown. Just imagine them coming in, and this is where they settled. Okay, this is really exciting. This is the actual land they came to. To our right, as we go through this little gate over here, you see they're rebuilding the fort. They're going to do some archaeology here in front of you. And we have a special visit on the museum as well. So we got to find the things you want to see. We're going to be back into the classroom by 11:15. So we're going to kind of back in the museum.
It's been 1 year and stuff like that.
A lot of memory on my video camera, and of 1 sentence worth, that's all you get. Here it is. This is the site of the first permanent English settlement in North America, established in 1607, but have a nice day. Okay, that's it. Yeah. Expeditious. That's why Congress in 1907 said, it's America's birthplace, we must honor this site. Oh, what should we do? What should we do? That's what they did, because everybody back then, they loved these timeless Egyptian-style monuments, these obelisks, so we get ours too. It's supposed to be a thank you present from Congress to the Virginia Company of London. That's a stockholding company paying all the bills to set this place up. They think they're going to get rich. After a few years, the Virginia Company is just hoping they're going to break even. If you like risky investments, just go put all your stock in the Virginia. Oh boy, it's just, I would stick to savings bonds. You know what I mean? But this monument goes up in 1907. The Memorial Church is put up in 1907 too. That's a little more site appropriate. It's on foundations of an older church that goes back to about 1617. And hey, it's our 300th anniversary. It should play happy music, birthday. They always time it right, don't they, you know? It's like that and little babies, you know? But we get a statue of Captain John Smith. That's our 3rd present for our 300th anniversary. All these things going up on this island, and the place is already being preserved, at least in part, by a private organization. They still take care of that part of the island today. Preservation Virginia. They have about 24 places all over the state of Virginia. Jamestown was one of their first projects. And then the feds show up. Here we are. Thank you, taxpayers, future taxpayers. We'll get him eventually. Just you wait and see. Oh, boy. We've been here since 1934. Middle of the Great Depression, we buy the rest of the island up. It's about 1,500 acres altogether. Now, when the English arrived, there's no rangers, there's no Preservation Virginia, there's no monument, there's nothing, okay? Trees, deer, that's it, and that's the way the English like it. Because the boss, the Virginia Company of London, had advised them. The boss said, I quote, "Do not distress the naturals," unquote. Like, don't upset the local people. There are a lot more of them than there are of you. You may need their help in the future. And the settlers find this out the hard way, because they don't land here at first. They land down around Virginia Beach. And our old movie put it this way. This is very subtle. It said, they found it unsuitable to their desires. Yeah, what's going on? This is the worst pun in American history, but I have to do it. It's too good to pass up. One of the settlers, Gabriel Archer, sticks his hand up and somebody shoots an arrow through Gabriel Archer's palm. Oh, man. This is a subtle hint. Do not distress the naturals. They're going to take about 2 weeks going up and down this big James River looking for the perfect place for settlement. And ta-da! The perfect place for settlement, almost. We get it because they designed this big, long footbridge you have to walk across and look down. And you say, it's a disease-ridden, bug-infested swamp with bad water. I wouldn't build a fort here. But remember, they were coming this direction. They had no idea in May how nasty it was going to get. They weren't thinking, oh boy, it's bugs and everything. They put their fort up real quick. John Smith and the fellows described the fort. We're talking a big fenced-in triangle, 300 by 300 by about 400 feet.
Now, when I started working here, 1992, if you said to me, where's the fort from 1607, I love questions, but that was not a question I loved. The only question I really, frankly, hated. Okay, and you would too if you were a tour guide. Because people came to see this from all over the country, and you'd have to point in the river and talk about erosion and how the experts had decided the fort had washed away into the river, and oh boy. I don't have to say that anymore, and I am very glad. 1994, Dr. Bill Kelso showed up. He had clues. He said, I don't think the fort's all washed away. Let me just dig out by the church tower and see what I can find. And he's been digging ever since. This is the 11 o'clock program talking just about the archaeology to find this fort. You'll want to check out the dig site. You also want to check out that Museum of Archaeology. Dr. Kelso picked out 1,000 of his favorite artifacts and put them on display over there. So the settlers land, they build their fort, and they could just sit around and, well, they've achieved national significance. The Rangers are coming. They just have to wait a few hundred years, but they want to go exploring, see what's out there. John Smith and about a dozen buddies get in this 20-some foot long open boat. They take 2 1,500-mile voyages of discovery up and down all these big rivers, in and out of the bay. The man makes it to the eastern shore. He's making a map of Virginia, looking for natural resources. He also wants to set up alliances, friendships, whenever he can with the native people. And he's going to go to the north bank of the York River. That's where he meets Chief Powhatan. When he meets Powhatan, forms an alliance with him, he's gone to the top. And we'll talk about that at the next stop. We also need to talk about, you know who? Star of stage and screen, Pocahontas' favorite daughter, Pocahontas. We have a statue over down there. It is the best photo op. She's got her hands out there. Hold her hand and take a picture. Just realize we did just what Walt Disney did. Kind of boosted her years. She's a big grown-up woman. According to the English settlers, she's 10 or 12, maybe 13, so poetic license, okay? We'll talk more about her and her daddy at the next stop. Now, anything you all want to ask before we go down there? Exploring all these waterways, he makes this map of Virginia, and you can have a copy for your very own. Go online, Library of Congress website, antique map section. You can download the things. You could do it in sections and put it together. You know, cover your whole wall with this thing. The resolution's very high. John Smith makes this map. Like I said, he's looking for natural resources too, and he's trying to form an alliance. When he gets on the north bank of the York River, visits Werowocomoco, Powhatan's capital city, and forms that alliance, that was a very wise move. Powhatan controlled land from up around Washington, D.C. today, down south of this James River, out west to the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's over 30 tribes, over 160 villages. You want him to like you, and he's willing to help the settlers. Because for one thing, we already did the body count. Here they come, 104 English men and boys, and that's it. I mean, I'm sure he's looking at this and saying, it's not going to amount to anything. And we're all saying, hindsight, Chief Powhatan, boy. And then they start dying like flies. It's disease, malnutrition, the extremes of climate, from 104 down to less than 40. I guess Powhatan figures while there's some left above ground, he should get with this alliance thing, because they bring stuff he wants. They know what to bring, because we're the first permanent English settlement. I guess the permanent, because if I don't, I'm talking about the guys down in what today is North Carolina, right? 1580s, Fort Raleigh, that's what the Park Service calls it. But when you study it in school, you learned the lost colony. Remember where they almost all disappear and nobody knows for sure what happened to it? A lot of conjectures. Some of those fellows make it back to England. One of them is going to write a book about what went on in the New World. He writes a dictionary of words that people speak down there. It's about 300 words in this dictionary, travel-friendly, practical words that what folks talk up here is close enough to what people speak down there. It really gives the Jamestown guys a jump start. Plus tips like, here's the kind of trade items to bring for someone like Powhatan, weapons, tools, precious metal. The statue of Pocahontas, I don't think Powhatan would say, look at that, a striking likeness of my favorite daughter, but he'd want to have it for his very own. Not so much, oh, Pocahontas, but ooh, a lot of copper in that bronze. He liked copper the way King James liked gold. So at the beginning, it's a pretty good situation. Pocahontas makes it even better. The settlers talk about her, and everybody seems to agree. Powhatan's favorite daughter, one of the English says her father could refuse her nothing, okay? So it'd be good to form an alliance with her, too. John Smith is going to meet Pocahontas when he visits Werowocomoco. She sponsors him into the tribe. He gets his own village up around Richmond. He gets a Powhatan Indian name, and she has a name for him that lets you know what she thinks about him. And has anybody not seen the Disney Pocahontas movie? It is so good. You must watch it. You must watch it. The music, the colors, the creativity. Oh my goodness. My favorite scene. Here's John Smith, Pocahontas, grown-up Pocahontas, looking into each other's eyes. The colors get really intense, and I love French horns. There must be 40 in the orchestra. They're just all the stops are out. And the leaves, symbolism, the leaves are swirling around their bodies. Ooh. If they don't get married, I mean, this is a soulmate opportunity that's gone up in smoke. Pocahontas describes it a little differently. Here's the name for John Smith that she gives him. She says, my English father. Okay, so father, respect, admiration, oh, daddy. But walking down the aisle, having little babies, not John Smith. It's another fellow who comes a little bit later. It's John Rolfe. It's R-O-L-F-E, for the record. They're going to get married. They're going to have a little baby, little Thomas, and they're going to go to England. The Virginia Company London foots the bill. This was very smart, because everywhere she goes, it's like when Queen Elizabeth came here in 2007. We just got all worked up about this. Betty White was here last weekend. We like that too. Hollywood royalty. It's so cool. But people say, I want to buy stock to help the company. I saw Pocahontas walking down the street in London. I want my sons to go over his adventures. It's great for the company, and Pocahontas is having a nice time. They're very nice to her. But they got some nasty germs that she picked up something. Smallpox, tuberculosis. You hear a lot of possibilities. Bottom line is she's going to die in England in her early 20s. She's buried over there. And then her daddy will die the next year. And that's when things really start to fall apart between the Powhatans and the English. Now, let's set in. Did you have a question about Pocahontas?
No, you answered it.
Oh my goodness. Whoo, that's great. All right. They put you in a room with 15 people and slam the door. Hopefully they were very nice. Okay, here we are, and when you're done, go say hi to John Smith. We got that statue over there. He looks pretty much like the real thing. He's based on a picture done back when John was alive. They let him hold a sword so you can say, oh, John Smith, military leader. He fought in Austria, Hungary, the Netherlands. The guy's been to Turkey. I mean, all over the place. Before he ever gets to Jamestown in 1607, and he isn't even 30 years old in 1607. You got to live fast back then. In the other hand, big fat books, like weighing him down. 10 titles under his belt by the time he dies in the 1630s. He's got to write a lot about Jamestown, his adventures, add to that dictionary of native terms, the culture of folks living here, all the stuff going on inside the fort that probably a lot of people wouldn't want you to know about. He tells it like it is. And John also writes that last book that we were talking about, that Settlement for Dummies book, okay? And he says what to do. Step 1, whining never makes it better, okay? Everybody whines, we all whine. John Smith said the problem is the ones who never stop, okay? Pick them out. They're easy to identify. Select these people and isolate them. Get them away from the other people. Train everybody to do every job. Teach them what to do. Walk off and leave them alone. And John says, no one has to work. I don't care. It's up to you. But he walks around and checks up on you. Don't you love that kind of boss? See if you're sort of with the program. And if you're not, at the end of the day, you don't get the award. And it's not like, oh, look, a coffee mug or, you know, a little ballpoint. I don't think they had those back then. John Smith gives you something you really want. You work, you eat, okay? No work, no food. He said it motivated them all just amazingly. We moved beyond survival. That's why we show glass blowing out by the entrance station. German, Polish, later on Italian craftsmen get this revved up in 1608. So John's doing all these things, but you know what? He's not here very long. I never realized this. 1609, they've been here, what, 2 years? It's the fall of 1609, sailing down the James River. There's a gunpowder explosion on board his ship, blasts a chunk of his leg off. They think he's going to die. They put him on a ship, sent John Smith home to England. Don't worry about John. It's real hard, more lives than a cat. It's really hard to kill John Smith. John makes it back to England and recovers, never comes back to Jamestown. That's when this place starts to get sick. They say, we started the winter. John Smith's number is 500 settlers. That's the number he gives. Spring 1610, 60 left alive out of 560. What went wrong? The question is, what did not go wrong? This terrible drought hits about that time. The fellow who takes over after John Smith, he was a nice guy. He had no leadership experience. He was kind of shoved into this by two opposing factions. He thought that each one could push him around. You know how this goes. And more settlers arrive in the fall with no supplies. They've been through the Bermuda Triangle, and then everything got soaked. They've got plague on board the ships when they arrive. It's just, man, it's a wonder there was anyone left alive. They almost bail out. The temporary governor has them on a ship getting ready to leave here. When talk about timing, the real governor, Delaware, shows up. He shows up and he makes them go back and rebuild the fort. When I do a tour for kids, I talk about it kind of being a roller coaster. We're down at the bottom of the roller coaster. Now we get to go up. Because it couldn't get much worse than during that starving time period. Pocahontas and John Rolfe get married. Tobacco starts making all that money. The drought lets up. By 1619, we're ready for a little autonomy. Like, let's run the place ourselves a little bit. Our first House of Burgesses, like they talk about at Williamsburg, they're going to be elected from little settlements up and down the rivers. It's about 20 fellows, and they meet inside the walls of the original old church. They're going to pass a lot of laws and rules trying to make this a much more user-friendly place. But you know, y'all, let's face it, it's 2010. What's still in the backyard? The swamp's there. It's not going anywhere. They really should have moved their capital long before they did. It takes till 1699 to move the capital. I think they needed a definite place to go. 1693, they have that place. One of the fellows in the cemetery, he got a do-over for 2007. Look at that big fancy tomb. You got to have descendants to do stuff like this for you. That's the Reverend James Blair. He was a preacher here at Jamestown. He's going to found the College of William and Mary. You see where this is going? 1693. And he says, my college is the seat of learning in Virginia, so that's where the capital should go. And a lot of people jump on this bandwagon. To them, it just makes sense. The capital moves, 1699. Excuse me. Whew. Technical difficulties. Yeah, when the capital moves, people start to trickle out of here. And by 1750, two families own everything. And we love those families because they farmed it. You know, they plowed a little bit and they ran their, they pretty much left it alone. We are so lucky. So what we're trying to do here, Park Service, Preservation, Virginia, we're supposed to take care of this place. We're supposed to preserve it for the future. We're supposed to do the fun stuff. You know, we get to tell the story. And there are a bajillion ways to do this. And I laugh at this thing. Isn't this the nuttiest? This is the Reader's Digest condensed version of the early years of Jamestown history. There's just so much to get into, so much to read and study about. My first boss, Deanne, worked here 31 years. And she said, I never got bored because there's so much to get into. But I wanted to introduce you to the story, sort of like one of those little teasers, get you interested. Some of the players, a little bit about the early years. Let me give you ideas of things to do. Checking out the dig site, right, where they're excavating the fort. Checking out that Museum of Archaeology over there. There is a place to get lunch. Halfway in between here and that museum. You can drive the Island Drive. You got to watch the guys doing their glass blowing. When I saw them latest, they were blowing blue glass, and that is so cool to watch. And you got to go to Yorktown too. Remember, that's part of our park. Last major battle of the American Revolution. And your ticket, if you got a ticket, it's good for the next 6 days. Now, someone tell me what time it is, and we'll see if I was good or not. 11. How do you do? I did it.
The tour will be about 40 minutes long. I'll take you through various portions in the site, show you the active archaeology, and then I'd also like to give you a bit of a historical perspective before we start. It's a rather large group. I would like you to please keep your questions till the end of the tour. I will be more than happy to stick around for as long as you want and answer your questions. But I know a lot of people have got a schedule that they're on and they want to be someplace, so I don't want to take up their time. All right? And also during the course of the tour, if we would please kind of stay close together so that you can hear what I'm saying and I don't have to yell, all right? And I always like to start the tour by giving you a couple questions to think about during the course of the tour. And that is, why is history important and why do we study history? Okay? Keep those two questions in the back of your mind, all right? And then I'd like to start off by asking another question, that is, can anybody tell me why in 1607 these 104 men and boys arrived here at Jamestown? What was their reason for coming here?
Well, they were in...
Yes, ma'am. They wanted to jump the land before everybody else. Well, the Native Americans were already here, see? No? Anybody else?
Trade.
Free trade?
And they wanted to beat out Spain.
Profit. Freedom of religion.
A little bit more simplistic.
Make money.
Make money, exactly. They wanted to make money, all right? A lot of people had the idea that they wanted to bring Christianity to the heathen. Some people thinking that they were coming here to find the Northwest Passage. No, the principal reason of why these people arrived here was to make money, all right? The Virginia company that organizes this whole undertaking was not unlike a corporation today, all right? They sold shares of stock in return for their investors' investment, all right? And these investors expected a return on their investment, okay? Now, can anybody tell me what was going on in Central and South America prior to 1607 with the Spanish?
They were making a lot of money.
Essentially how?
Gold, silver.
They were raping the country of their gold and silver, right? Putting it on their galleons and bringing it back to old Spain, right? Okay? The English crown saw what was going on. Elizabeth secretly or covertly was supporting, if you're familiar with Sir Francis Drake, the Sea Dogs, all right? They were raiding these Spanish galleons as they were coming back to Spain and taking all their gold and silver, all right? Finally, it had gotten to the point that the Spanish king had had enough of this, Philip II, all right? And can anybody tell me what happens in 1588?
Armada.
The what?
Armada.
The Armada, all right? The Spanish king assembles this huge fleet and sends it to England with the intent purpose of destroying the English fleet, all right? We all know what happens to the Spanish Armada. Right? Not only naval engagement, but they had to deal with weather, they had to deal with the equipment that they were utilizing, but it ends up the Spanish fleet is essentially destroyed. Right? This paves the way now for the English to come to North America and settle here relatively unimpeded by the Spanish. Okay, now the Virginia Company was not so short-sighted into thinking, okay, we send these 104 men and boys here, they go looking for gold and silver, they don't find anything, they just get back on the ships and head home, all right? They had a backup plan. They brought artisans with them. They brought jewelers, they brought blacksmiths, they brought masons, they brought carpenters, they brought glassmakers, all with the intent purpose that if they were not able to find gold and silver here, they would be able to manufacture something here in order to sell back in England. Now, if you're familiar with the system that they had back then, all right, you had the master craftsman, then you had the apprentice and the journeyman, okay? The master craftsman had essentially all the corporate knowledge. Let's say you wanted to start a glass-making operation here. What happens if your glassmaker, your master craftsman dies? What happens to your glass-making operation? It essentially goes away too, all right? a lot of the plans that they had laid never came to fruition because within that first year, over 2/3 of these 104 men and boys died. All right? The other problem that they had was they didn't bring any backwoodsmen, they didn't bring any farmers with them. Their plan was they were going to trade with the Native Americans for their foodstuffs, right? They brought trinkets, they brought glass beads, they brought iron objects like hatchets and knives, okay? All to trade with the Native Americans. The only problem with this plan was when the English arrive here, it's during the midst of one of the worst droughts in over 700 years, okay? It wasn't like everything was brown, all right, but the Native Americans had a corn crop, but they only had enough to feed themselves. They didn't have an excess to trade with. So it ended up being, instead of having a reciprocal arrangement with the Native Americans, it ends up becoming adversarial, all right? And the English essentially have to take by force the food from the Native Americans. This doesn't really put them on the best footing with the natives right off the bat, okay? Now, can anybody tell me why they would have located their settlement here at Jamestown Island? River, okay? Bill comes here and he says, no, the fort's still here. They've just been looking for it in the wrong place. And what Bill was thinking, if you look over here to your left here or behind you, the church structure, right? That's an early 1900s construction, but behind it is a church tower. And the church tower is from the 1650s, right? It's the oldest standing structure here on the island. Bill's thinking is the English would not have constructed the church very far from where they would have had their first church services, okay? Naturally, when the English arrived here, one of the first things that they would have done was conduct church services in order to thank God for their safe passage to the New World, right? They would have had a tarp and essentially just had their services underneath the tarp. But he's thinking, okay, that tower is not very far from where they would have had those services. So he focuses attention on the tower and starts excavating in what we call the eastern bulwark or the eastern corner of the fort. Right? You have to imagine this, all right? He comes out here by himself with a wheelbarrow and a shovel, all right? He puts up his rope perimeter and he starts digging, you know? We like to tell the story. There's a woman comes up to the rope with her two boys, and one of the boys asks Bill, hey, sir, what are you doing here? And Bill goes, well, I'm looking for James Ford. The mother grabs the two kids and she pulls them away from Bill. She's thinking the guy's out of his mind. Right? Everybody knows this fort doesn't exist. What is this guy doing? Right? The only thing was, where Bill started digging, he starts finding artifacts. Okay, these are all from the 17th century. It ends up, what he had been digging into was a trash pit. Okay, so he's pulling all these cool artifacts out. This stimulates interest in what's going on here. He's able to get additional funding, put his team together, and the rest, shall we say, is history, okay? Now, what I would like to do is, like I said, if we could stay kind of close together outside of England. This is their first foothold in what became the empire where the sun never sets. Okay, we got everybody. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, right now you are presently inside the original 1607 James Fort. All right? The palisades that you see surrounding you are in the original locations of where the original palisades were. How do we know that? When Bill starts excavating in the eastern bulwark, one of the first things he finds is this series of circles in the ground in a line. All right? If you take a wooden post and you put it in the ground and you allow that post to decompose, there's a chemical reaction between the post and the soil, all right? The post actually stains the soil. So what Bill was looking at was the original palisade line, all right? What does he do? He follows the palisade north until we get to what we call the northern bulwark, all right? The line stops. What does he do? He digs a little bit to the right, digs a little bit to the left. He picks up the western palisade and follows it to the river. All right? So too with the southern palisade. Until when you look at the fort all right, in totality, we have over 88% of the fort still here. The only portion of the fort that has been washed away by the James River is what we call the western bulwark, or the western corner of the fort. And if you go down here to the river, you'll see a seawall here. In the early 1900s, the Army Corps of Engineers arrives here at the request of Preservation Virginia to construct a seawall, right? The Preservation Virginia wanted to save the remainder of the island. So they construct this seawall not knowing that the fort exists, inadvertently preserving the remainder of the fort, all right? I like to tell people that occasionally the Army Corps of Engineers does do good work, and in this case, for the archaeologists, this was a godsend, all right? The other thing that's unique about this area, historic Jamestown, James Fort, we have a 2-for-1 deal here, all right? Not only do we have the original fort, but can anybody tell me what was going on in the United States in 1861? The Civil War, right? Just for orientation, right, this is east, this is west, this is south, and this is north. Can anybody tell me what major city lies upriver from us? Richmond. Richmond, okay, the capital of the Confederacy. The Confederates were concerned that Union gunboats would come up the James River here and attack Richmond. Hence, they come here, they construct a fort, right? When we go through the western palisade there, you're going to see a series of earth mounds to the front of you and on your right-hand side. Those are the remains of the original Confederate fort. The earthworks actually came right through the center of the fort here, all right? We had to excavate through those earthworks in order to get to the 1607 level. Now, when the Confederates come here and they take all this earth and pile it up into these earthworks, what happens to the artifacts that were in the ground, all right? They're moved up into those earthworks. We were finding literally thousands of artifacts piled up into those earthworks. They're important to us, but they're not as important to us as if we would have found them in their original location, all right? Now, going back to the historical perspective, all right, I mentioned about the when the English arrive here, it's during one of the worst droughts in over 700 years. Can anybody tell me where the English, when they arrive here, would have been initially getting their water from?
The river.
The James River, okay? Can anybody tell me what kind of water is in the James? It's brackish, all right? This flows into the Chesapeake Bay, which flows into the Atlantic Ocean. Come here during one of the worst droughts in 700 years, you're not having a lot of freshwater flow coming down the river. Hence, a lot of this seawater is backing up. I don't know about you or me, but when you eat or drink something that's salty, what does it make you want to do?
Drink more.
Drink more, okay? This is exacerbating their problems here at Jamestown. They're drinking from this river, all right? You have to put this in perspective. They leave England in December of 1606. They arrive here in May of 1607. During the course of the voyage, they're kept below decks, all right, like cargo. The sailors don't want to have anything to do with these people. They're eating miserable food. They come here in the beginning of summer here in Virginia. They're wearing wool. They're dressed in armor, all right? The Native Americans are shooting at them, and they're drinking from the river. You can understand now or appreciate a little bit why so many people die here the first year. All right? The other thing is they construct this palisade in approximately 20 days. All right? It's going out to the woods, felling the timber, dragging it to the site, splitting it, digging the ditches, putting the posts in. We had our field crew of archaeologists do this and the wood was split. And we used an electric drill. But I guarantee you that was backbreaking work for these people who had all of these other things going on in their lives in addition to having to build the palisade. Okay? Now, I direct your attention to the structure here to your left. Okay? A lot of people have this idea when the English arrive here they would have been constructing log cabins, all right? That's a Finnish thing, Norwegian thing, all right? what they would have been building was what they were familiar with, right? This is typical of the structures that they were familiar with back in Norfolk, Suffolk, Isle of Wight in England, all right? It's called a post and ground or mud and stud construction. Essentially what they do is they dig a hole in the ground, they put a wooden post in, and then they backfill around it, all right? And this is what we're looking for as archaeologists. When we're excavating, okay, and you see these posts in a line forming a rectangle, okay, they're equidistant apart, more than likely what you're looking at is a structure. And this was actually a structure that we found in the corner of the fort. Those posts are located over the top of the posts that we originally found here in the corner of the fort. Now, the one thing about archaeology, in most sciences, you know, you make a mistake, all right, you can go back and erase it on your paper. In archaeology, once you take the dirt out of the ground, you can't put it back, all right? So we have to be extremely meticulous when it comes to our excavating, all right? And if you look here on the left, this is where we're doing our active archaeology presently. We dig in 10-foot by 10-foot squares. These squares are on a grid system, all right? Whenever we're excavating and we find artifacts in the ground, we know exactly where we're taking those artifacts from, okay? We didn't set it up yet this morning, but we have a device, it's called a laser transit. What we're able to do is, when we find a particular feature or an important artifact in the ground, we're able to map that, put it into a database, so later on we can go back and generate maps as far as the location within the fort. Here is what we're talking about when we say features on the ground, all right? One of the things that people wonder about, like I said, how deep do you dig? People have the impression that when the river overflows, it deposits silt on the ground here, and that gradually builds up. We're talking millions of years for that kind of situation to develop here. All right. The only soil that's been manipulated here at James Fort has been done by human beings. Okay. Whether it was the Confederates coming here and piling this dirt up into the earthworks, all right, or modern landscaping, just as we, the archaeologists here, actually put this earth mound in here for this purpose, so that you can actually observe what we're doing here as far as the active archaeology. So that was all hand dug. But anyway, what I'm standing on right now is the surface that the people, the colonists, would have been walking on back here in 1607. All right. I mentioned the mud and stud construction. They dig a hole in the ground, put a wooden post in. This is what we call a post hole. All right. I liken it, if you're, back home, if you're putting in a fence line, or if you're putting in a mailbox, and you start digging that hole. Okay. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go through the grass. Then you got the topsoil. Underneath that, you might have some sand or some clay, but that all goes into a pile. All right. Once you put that post in, you're going to backfill around it. All right. So all that dirt that you've piled up to the side is all going to go into that hole. And what happens is, what goes in, what comes out is sand and then loam and whatever. It's all mixed up. And that's what this is. This is called backfill. All right. Or post. I'm presently standing in a structure, okay, that was built here during the time of the fort period. All right, you have a post here, post here, post here. It's rectangular. All right.
Yeah.
Just to bring your attention back to the structure over there in the corner. All right. Once they put these posts in, they put the skeleton of the building together. All right. In order to put in their walls, what they would do is they would take wood, what we would call lath, and nail it up to those upright beams, all right, in a row, and then they essentially pack mud in between the lath in order to build the walls, okay? Originally what they were doing is putting the lath in the ground and essentially just burying the bottoms. Well, early on they realized what was happening is the wood was soaking up the moisture from the soil, and their walls started to rot. So later on what they realized was, okay, we put some river cobbles in the ditch, and then put the lath on top of the cobble. That way it stays out of the ground and our walls don't rot. All right? We have another feature here that's made out of brick. Anybody give a shot as far as what that particular feature might be? Fireplace, all right? Actually, it's a chimney base. You have to understand, this is a dynamic archaeology site, all right? It's not like they just came here, they put in one series of buildings and that was it, all right? James Fort burned down at least twice, okay? So, and the Palisades were only here for approximately 20 years. After 20 years, the Palisades came down and this reverted to farmland. This was part of a later structure. It was a 20 by 40 foot building. It had a brick-lined cellar. The cellar was actually located underneath where those sandbags were presently located. Okay? We were really excited about excavating this thing because we were thinking we'd find a huge number of artifacts in it. We got down to the bottom of the cellar, we found virtually nothing. Right? Is anybody here from Virginia? Can you tell me what was Bacon's Rebellion? Anybody know about... okay. In 1676, the colonists on the frontier were having a problem with the Native Americans. The Native Americans were raiding the frontier. The colonists were a little upset with this. They came to the governor and said, hey, do something to protect us, all right? There was no protection forthcoming. It ends up, a few of the colonists took it upon themselves to come here to Jamestown and get the attention of the governor. They burned down Jamestown, all right? This structure was in existence at the time. We came to find out that the person who owned this structure was a sympathizer with the people, the rebellion, all right? So what we figured was he knew when the buildings were, the fort was going to be fired. He removes all of his precious belongings before the firing. Hence, we found no artifacts in the building, okay? Little mystery, intrigue here at Jamestown. I have another feature here. It's about 2.5 feet wide and about 5.5 feet long. Can anybody tell me what this might be?
A grave? A burial site?
Exactly. It's a grave. All right? We find these all throughout the interior of the fort. You see all the crosses over there towards the western bulwark? All right? There are 24 graves and 22 grave shafts. All right? We believe that those are probably the first people that arrive here. They die within the first summer, August or September of the first year of being here. Okay. Should have taken this off beforehand. I mentioned also about, and you can see this as we see through the tour here, but I mentioned about bringing artisans here. One of the things they brought was blacksmiths. Okay, they wanted to refine iron ore here. We always wanted to find a furnace here. This is the remains of one of the furnaces that they had inside the interior of the fort. Okay, when we go through the Palisades there, we actually have, it's a working furnace. We actually refine iron ore there, but this was a location of where we found one of the original furnaces inside the fort. It's a conical type contraption, all right? It has an opening at the top and an opening at the bottom. What they would do is they would take iron ore and charcoal, feed it in through the top. This whole process would continue on during the course of the day with them continually feeding this stuff in. And then at the end of the day, what they would do is open up the little opening at the bottom, all this stuff would come out of the bottom. It's what we call slag. It's all the impurities from the iron ore. And they would be left with a large bloom of iron. All right? This was what the blacksmiths or the metalsmiths would be utilizing then in order to manufacture their iron tools or their iron weapons here at Jamestown. Okay? So this was a major find for us. Now, I mentioned about the archaeology as far as how we dig. When we find artifacts on the site, okay, all these artifacts that we find in a particular square will be put into a bag. That bag will have a context number, all right? The square that where we had find these artifacts. These bags go into a lab that we have on site. The artifacts are washed, they're sorted, they're numbered, and they're cataloged, all right? All the artifacts stay here on the island. The beauty about this is, if somebody wanted to do research associated with, let's say, white Dutch clay ball pipes from the 17th century, they're able to come here, we're able to pull those artifacts right from our vault, and they can do the research right here. All right? It's a unique thing about public archaeology. The idea of being able to come up to the ropes here and to actually talk to the archaeologists is one of the unique things that we have here, and we want to have that continue here. Okay? All right. What I would like to do now is, if we could, we'll make a right, and we're going to go through the palisades there, and the metalsmith, the blacksmith, they would essentially use the opening at the top, they put the iron on. Getting back to history a little bit. Can anybody tell me how the Native Americans viewed the Spanish when the Spanish arrived in Central and South America? Who did they think these people were?
Gods.
Gods, right? They had never seen a white man before, right? They had never seen these huge beasts that they were riding, their horses. They had never seen the outfits that reflected the sun's rays before, their armor, okay? The natural assumption for the Native Americans was that these people were gods. The Virginia Company wanted to keep that same facade going here with the Native Americans. They told the colonists specifically that you will hide your casualties from the Native Americans. Hence they were burying their bodies inside the fort walls. It had only gotten to the point where they had had so many casualties that they had to start burying their bodies outside the walls. But by then, the Native Americans knew what was going on, the jig was up, so it really didn't make any difference anyway, right? The other thing I wanted to mention was, when you walked through the palisades here, you notice the cobbles in a rectangular pattern along the western palisade, all right? These were two structures that we found while we were excavating along the western palisade. All right. One of those structures, at the far eastern end, when we started digging, okay, we came upon this structure. All right. Can anybody tell me or have an idea of what this structure might have been? We already seen one of them on the site.
Chimney or?
Chimney base, okay? Chimney base. We found that chimney base sitting inside a well, all right? Now, who in his right mind would construct a building over the top of a backfilled well? And essentially, why would they put, especially the heaviest part of the building, the chimney, over the top of a backfilled well? I have to impress upon everybody that the corporate knowledge here at Jamestown was extremely short, all right? You have to understand, a lot of people have the idea when the English arrive here from England, they just kind of like hang out here at Jamestown, all right? That was not the case, okay? Many of the people that come here had land grants from the king. Their whole mission or their whole plan was to arrive here from England, to resupply and then head either upriver or downriver. What's happening is the corporate knowledge here was very, very limited. People were constantly coming and going. So the idea of a person constructing a building over the top of a backfilled well was not unreasonable. All right? The other thing was, I mentioned when the English arrived here, they initially started drinking from the river, okay? Eventually they reasoned, hey, maybe we should dig a well here. You know, it would be a good idea for fresh water. So there were two areas in the site. We've got the white PVC pipe sticking out of the ground. When you go back onto the site, you'll see them. One's in the center of the fort, and the other one's in the northern bulwark here. When we started digging the well in the northern bulwark, all right, we got down to the bottom. It's approximately 14 feet down to the water table. We had found some really unique artifacts down there, and you're some of the lucky first people to see this. We got down to the bottom of the well, and is anybody familiar with the Swiss Guards at the Vatican? Right? They hold this. It's got a long shaft and it's got a ceremonial crest at the top. Okay, it's called a halberd. All right. We found a totally intact halberd at the bottom of the well. All right, and you will see it when you go if you go into the museum. It's on display. It just came out of conservation in July. All right, so you're going to be some of the first ones that have seen this. In addition to the halberd, we found a totally intact Scottish pistol at the bottom of the well. All right, we had the barrel X-rayed. It still had 2 rounds in the barrel. All right, and we were finding literally thousands of animal remains. We figured that they would butcher an animal and they'd throw the bones in the well. Okay, you have to understand. If a well goes bad or it dries up, okay, you have this huge hole in the middle of the fort. What do you do with it? Garbage. You throw your garbage in it, okay? Now, to the colonists, their garbage, to an archaeologist, it suddenly becomes this huge treasure trove. You have all these artifacts in a very, very confined space, all right? So, we know with reasonable assurance what they were eating here, all right? Because of the animal remains that were in the bottom of the well. We found, when we started excavating the well in the center of the fort, we finished it up last December, and we were really excited about this because this is what we believe to be John Smith's well, the first well. And we were figuring we could maybe possibly find cannons at the bottom of this thing, all right? The fort had been abandoned at one point. After the starving time, they essentially said, to heck with this place, and they boarded their ships and headed back to England. Unfortunately, they didn't get past the Chesapeake Bay. The relief convoy was coming up the James River with the incoming governor, Lord Delaware. He meets these people and says, turn around, you're heading back to the fort. So these guys come back. But anyway, we were excavating the well and we got down to the bottom and we were really excited. We found virtually nothing at the bottom of the well. We found an oak cask, okay? But we came to the conclusion it had a series of post holes around the top of the well. And what we surmise is, being in the center of the fort, all right, if you're attacked by the natives, okay, and they breach the palisades, you're always going to want to have a last point of defense, a final refuge. What better place to have it than at a well, all right? At least you're going to have water, okay? So the well that we had in the northern bulwark was more accessible to the public. Hence, people were dropping this stuff in it. But the well that was in the center of the fort was restricted. You had a guard on this, okay? So you didn't have people dropping their trash into that well, all right? Okay. Now, this leads me up to my finishing point here. If you take the road here, just for information, okay, you go down the trail. The Dale House is on your left, okay. We got a restaurant there, and we got bathrooms in there. If you go a little bit further down the trail, there's the copper-clad building. That's our museum. I strongly encourage everybody to go into the museum and see the artifacts that we have here on site. This is the last point, okay? I mentioned at the top of the show, okay?
This is the Archaeological Museum at Jamestown that we're going to look at next.
Yeah, I have to.
This is the part of the Jamestown settlement they found out is underwater. Here's it.
And he actually burns his own house in 1676 during the Bacon's Rebellion. So they have the cellars over here and the chimneys over here.
We drove over that. I didn't dress like that.
You too.
I hope you ain't bragging.
This is not the first church that was ever erected here. It's just the last part of the last one that they had standing.
Oh, yeah, right.
Where the old boys were sitting outside, sure.
But as far as seeing the real plantation, the other way you can go inside and out. And there, I think most of them are Indians.
Yes.
So I think they're pretty, we're right down here.
She was queen.
This was the main working furnace. And this is where the big kiln was, where they made the pots so that they could do some of the glass work. And this is where they took the glass once they made it to let it cool down.
Sorry? Well, it's pretty common. I'd say for the 1600s, it's pretty unusual. But in today's day and age, it's not unusual. It's one of these things, it's called the glass.
That's why we're here. Watch it blow it.
remind me to tell you about Nana's glass blowing she does every year with her teachers. She has a lady come and wow. A bucket of water.
Do you get burned a lot?
No.
That's just amazing.
We get put it in this bin, and then as this glass cools, if it's not annealed, it just pop off and then we recycle it.
That was no good, Sue. You see it? You're making the wine glass.
says right in there that if you steal food, he'll put you to death. And daggum, he did it. So we're going to do exactly what he tells us, including come to church twice every day. Now, the martial laws don't last forever. War with Indians doesn't last forever. We're going to celebrate a wedding in here. Who's getting married? Pocahontas. earring that John Rolfe got.